Welcome to Noble Theory Podcast. Today's topic, artificial intelligence. Scott, what do you know about artificial intelligence?
Well, I know if nothing else is true, it's true that it's sort of most recently in the last year or two feels like it's gone from like an amusing novelty to like a, perceived cultural destroyer. Like everybody's up in arms, the actors unions and the voice talent and, creatives and film and industry and music are completely beyond themselves, climbing out of their own skin because they feel like they're going to be replaced by AI.
So the background with AI is going to come, I think, to many people as a surprise. AI has been around for a long time. Think back to manual typewriters, and AI is in its early development. So AI...
So it wasn't like a robot punching a manual typewriter? Is there something? It's bad. All right, never mind. Sorry.
Robin Williams he's acting as a robot. Right. No. This is... So in 1956, Dartmouth sets up really what is the first artificial intelligence computer science lab in the country. And several of its first scientists, professors, these are mathematicians and physicists, went on to earn Nobel Prizes because of their early work. The development of the digital computer, though, arises even before that, comes out of the World War II war effort and the use of technology to sort of develop technologies to encrypt messages. So a lot of the impetus behind the first artificial intelligence wave is due to the money the federal government is injecting into...
The government's behind
always behind it.
Yeah, okay.
So
we were paying for it. We didn't even know it. I wasn't born yet.
These attempts at cryptography to either crack your adversary's code or to encrypt your own codes is the germ that the Department of Defense was trying to seed to develop that technology. And so a lot of digital computing comes out of that. In fact, Alan Turing, who was a English professor, I think he was at Cambridge or Oxford, one of those two. He had problems and ended up dying in life quite young, I think to suicide. But he developed one of the first tests you could use to determine whether or not a thinking machine is what they referred to sort of artificial intelligence as when he was contemplating this in the 40s. It's called the Turing Test today.
Now, is it okay to, I think of you as the thinking machine often.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah, okay.
That's really kind. That's really kind. No. This is, the Turing Test simply is this. If you cannot tell that the person that you're typing with, say, on the other side of an email, the other side of a instant message is a human or a AI bot, what we'd call AI bot today, then it's success. That would be intelligence. And so the Turing test has been used for a long time. In fact, there was a program that was written in the, I think it was in the 50s, called ELIZA. I could have it wrong. It could have been, it started then, but it didn't actually get done until the 60s. It's called ELIZA, and ELIZA would be a prompt and response with a human being, and the computer taking the text responses. So
a pre-Watson.
It's more like a chat GPT. ELIZA, I'm not happy today. And ELIZA would say, Jeff, why aren't you happy today? Well, it's cold out and my heating broke. Were you able to contact somebody to help you with your heating? It would take the prompts that you give it and have a small database. And then it would generate a text response. Now, this was done again in the 60s. We're having this kind of technology working through, but the technology. Ultimately, that we would come to appreciate as real AI doesn't start taking place until maybe the 90s. But that earlier stuff, the stuff that was underway at Dartmouth, is working on programs that can compute algebra problems. problems that can generate proofs in geometry. This is high school level algebra.
Is it safe to say that the U.S. was once again the leader?
By far, we were working with our colleagues at English universities on some of this, but Dartmouth is the epicenter for this activity. But these programs are using arrays of what we'd think of as sort of symbolic logic. A lot of the thinking behind this early artificial intelligence in the 50s comes out of the thinking of philosophers before that, and it develops into sort of code. In fact, one of the first programs to sort of really use symbolic logic was developed by a professor of political science. He was doing some work with the Rand Corporation, and he saw, and this is, again, the 50s.
The mysterious Rand Corporation. Behind a big wall, and nobody who works there could talk about working there or
That's
something.
right.
That's only the beginning.
He was there on a visit.
The government contracts at Rand billions.
And he saw this printer printing up maps, and the maps were not drawn with lines and geometric shapes. The shapes were formed by letters. So you would have like A's representing a cluster of A's representing a city, and the border of a state might be X's. Right? This is sort of very primitive text-based graphics before there were really nice graphics.
Symbols with a legend.
So he realized that if the computer can be programmed to generate graphics through text, then you could use text to generate symbols and in reverse. And so that prompted a breakthrough.
Maybe was it as simple as that they were looking for something to create the border out of? Were they just
yes? It was just the letters. There wasn't graphics like we think of line graphics today. Or
makes sense.
There's vector graphics, and there are
no clip art.
No clip art, but there are graphics that we use today that are fully algorithmic. That is, mathematical formula generate the image. This Noble Fury sign right here is generated with that kind of SVG graphics, so algorithm. You could also use line graphics that are made with shapes, and that's a more common way of doing that. And early computers, PCs from the 80s and 90s would have some primitive line graphics, but that stuff didn't exist in the 50s, right? So they had to use text to make graphics.
So jump us to today.
Okay, from this Dartmouth experiment, though, we have the seeds of speaking like in a microphone and having a computer take that
text.
speech, turn it into text, save it as text, or respond to it with text prompts. There's not the ability to return speech yet. That happens much later. So DARPA, which is a federal defense entity that funds a lot of research for defense purposes, starts getting into this. They see the benefit of, wow, artificial intelligence can be used for lots of cool things in the military. So they begin funding programs, and we get a groundswell of grants being given to various different universities, lots of different ideas.
Here comes the money.
The money starts rolling in. Lots of cool toys are created, but nothing happens of it, nothing commercial. So they go through what's known as the first AI winter. And so this leads us into the 80s the late 70s. The Digital Equipment Corporation, they're able to create an AI tool that allows them to order all the parts that they need when they build a computer. So a client calls and says, we need a mini computer, we need a mainframe, and this is the specification of the mainframe, and we'd like to have it delivered in 6 months. They come up with a price. There's a salesman. This is back then. This was people going to the company, showing catalogs. Well, they had a tool, an AI tool, then that they could put in the specifications for this computer. The AI tool would then develop a parts list. And that parts list then could
Based on the required specs, the computer is going to
the parts list would be
extrapolate
generated,
out,
and then the parts supplier would receive this list digitally, and they could start working
Must have
on
felt like a revolution, right?
a revolution. It saved Digital Equipment Corporation, and this is in the 70s, $40 million a year to implement this. So this was the first big breakthrough with using AI commercially.
Two big things there, 70s and 40 million. You're talking about a ton.
Unbelievable.
40 million is a ton of money today. 40 million in the 70s, you know.
Correct. So in the 90s, we get the ability to process checks. Remember the little pieces of paper you would write for payment? Well, these would roll through a scanner.
Remember, banks used to be allowed 7 days or 10 days to clear a check because they had to mail the check. They had to process it, mail it to the
Once the processing
bank.
center got that check, it would shoot through a scanner, and the scanner would be able to read handwritten numbers.
Again,
and letters.
A giant step forward for AI.
Giant step.
Right?
This is AI.
Yeah.
This is machine learning. Right?
Well, think about this, because there's as many different ways to write out the words $100 payable to as there are people.
Tons.
Virtually
so
every
they would
single.
have to go through training sessions with different versions of checks and handwriting, different people's handwriting, different styles of checks, and they would train the computer programs. This is machine learning. That's an area of artificial intelligence. If you think of artificial intelligence as being an overarching, huge sort of area, it could be decomposed into all kinds of areas. And one of those areas is machine learning. There's generative AI, for instance. There's a lot of textual
generative AI being where the AI is actually generating the initial
chat bots. Or generative
posing
AI,
the questions, posing the opening questions.
Generative AI is what we're using with search engines now. So, if we just go back 20 years ago.
Siri is a simple version of.
If we go back 20 years ago, you go to Google.
I'm surprised you didn't answer.
And you try to do a search, you would just be returned a list of links, right? They would be ranked, prioritized. That's machine learning doing that, ranking
Wait, you're talking
for
about
you.
before Google was monetized for search results, but that's another podcast.
Well, that's true. Now, Google has an AI tool that is not just returning links to you, organized in a hierarchy, indexed hierarchy of
based
highest
on your
results
search,
and other advertising reasons, but it's also summarizing that information for you. So it's, in other words, you ask a question now, and it's actually returning a question, response, an answer to your question, responsive to the terms in your question.
To your point, I'm now getting emails, and the emails, I didn't ask for this, but the emails are now above the email in a box is a summary of what's in the email. So when I open the email, before I go into the weeds of all the, the granular details in an email, it's got literally bullet points.
Yeah.
This email is about this, doom, it hits some and misses some. I didn't ask for it. I'm not sure I like it, but it's interesting because it did it on its own. I didn't request it, and it's extracting, and it's hitting the mark for the most part. And it is, sometimes when you're in a hurry.
It's super useful. In fact, the one thing that I am, always prone to do my own research because I want to know the sources. And so what these generative AI summaries, some of them do is provide you a few of the top links that go into answering that question for you. But if you go into it deep, you'll find oftentimes that the results of the summaries are not really as good as a thorough researcher would want them to be. In fact, it's a great first start, though.
In fact, Jeff, if you would do a summary of your own email or of my email, or I would do vice versa, we would be better up. We would do a better job.
Of course.
Because we're going to glean out those things that are
we know what's important. Right?
Exactly.
And our question is oftentimes general, you use general terms when you frame a question or pose a question, but you're thinking very specifically about certain things.
Well, there's emotion behind people's intent, the words, and the nuance. So I got a whole bunch of stuff I want to.
So I just clear through a couple. The 90s, we've got check processing, voice recognition. Mm-hmm. So we can remember maybe the days when there was this primitive phone call you would get, and you would actually talk to a new tool, which would be an AI voice generated call, and that was not a great experience. They had something
still isn't a great experience
in the 80s called expert systems, which they were like little kiosks, and firms would buy them, and they were specialized task-specific AI tools for where the information was very limited. It wasn't generalized. And we had industrial robotics. So you think of all the car manufacturing that started using robots. Those were driven by machine learning software that taught them how to rivet, how to handle some piece not quite fitting right, and so forth.
When you bring up the cars, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but the first thing I think of is the Chinese, stealing our intellectual property automotively with the batteries. We came up with a lot of the technology. We farmed it out to China to manufacture it. They in fact stole the technology. The brilliance behind a lot of the battery technology, and solar is another big. Solar and wind power, whether or not one is a fan of those ulterior motives or ulterior uses of venues for energy, the question really is, what happened to the technology? We spent tens of millions of dollars and months developing this really high level of technology, and they stole it fast.
That's right.
Cars and batteries.
So the United States is still at the vanguard of much of this, but I think that there's a lot of other advanced nations are catching up. What really brought AI into its own recently is the massive development in hardware technology, computer hardware technology, and the availability of massive amounts of data to train. So most of these AI tools are built on machine learning technology and or natural language tools, which a lot of the real center algorithmic basis for these it comes out of statistics.
But to your point, one of the things that just broke the last few days is apparently Chinese government has launched a new AI system called V3, and apparently they spent $5 million, $6 million, and they're claiming that it is as close, not quite up to snuff, but close to a similar AI model that cost $100 million or more in the US for $5 million. This is what China does so well, is take something and refine it and take the attributes of it that are what make it strong and solid and beneficial, and then do it a lot cheaper.
Right. So if we think about the computer hardware that would have existed, say, in the 80s, this is new. The first development or the first thrust into desktop computing at home computing. It really started in the 70s, late 70s, but it moves forward. So back then, let's just say 1979, 1980, you would have had a Z80 microprocessor running at about 4 megahertz, 8-bit computing, and that would have had about 64 kilobytes of memory. Today...
Pretty funny little numbers by comparison.
Right? Today...
You can get a watch with more than that.
My laptop over here in the desk, it's pretty powerful, but it's got 64 gigabytes of memory. 64 kilobytes in 1979, 1980, 64 gigabytes today. That's a 1 million times increase.
And what about the RAM, which is all to do with
that is the RAM.
Oh, that is RAM. I see.
That is the RAM.
Yeah, compared to the 8.
So the 1980 computer, 64 kilobytes. Today, 64 gigabytes, 1 million times. The processor's power. So the Z80 microprocessor back then, 4 megahertz, 8 bits. It had 8,500 transistors. 8,500 transistors. Today, the Intel Core i9 I have has 5 gigahertz. So 4 megahertz back then, 5 gigahertz today. That is a 553,000 times increase in power, speed.
Not nothing.
But the number of transistors is today 4.7 billion transistors versus 8,500 transistors. So each clock cycle in a CPU cycle would have 8,500 instructions in the 1980 computer. Today, 4.7 billion transistors on each core, but the modern CPU mine has 8 cores. So let's take those numbers and multiply them all by 8. Okay, so the magnitudes are 4-5 million times more power on the CPU compared to the old CPU. Memory 1 million times.
And so this all, what this really,
what this does is it allows the training of powerful. So again, the primitives are optimization routines from the world of statistics. You're trying to minimize mean square error in many cases, or you're trying to optimize some parameters, the minimization and error in some parameters. A lot of the tools are statistical tools that go into machine learning, but you really can't use them. Even though the ideas of them existed, the tools mathematically existed then, they didn't have the hardware that had the power to generate the results. That's why they couldn't do anything useful. Today, computers are so powerful. And there's
they were coming up short, in other words.
They were coming up short. It's sort of like horsepower in a way.
Yeah, sure.
You
can't get up the hill.
Well, if you've got 18 horsepower in a plane engine, you're not going to get a plane up in the air.
Sure.
So when you have massive horsepower,
tell that to the Wright brothers.
Hundreds of thousands of pounds, but they could only barely carry them themselves for just
a few hundred yards,
and only 20 feet in the air or something, right?
Right.
If you want to get tens of thousands of pounds of cargo up in the air, you've got to have hundreds of thousands of foot-pounds of thrust, right?
Sure.
So there's just a difference in magnitude, and it's allowed that to happen. So cheap, fast hardware and availability of lots of data with lots of databases. And so you can train these models now to follow the ideas, the path of deep learning. And so now we have the ability to create music, and we have the ability to scan medical slides and to diagnose people.
Well, speaking of music for a minute, again, there's a lot of concern in the creative space, filmmakers and in music, obviously in all creative spaces as artists and a whole litany of things. But speaking directly to the music component for a moment, the musicians are really worried because look, it's complicated. There's a lot to unpack here, but quickly, the music community, there's two camps. There's more than two camps, but there's at least two camps. One camp is, I'm an artist. I don't have any money. I can't go into a recording studio and record with a bunch of musicians and toil away and have an engineer and do a mix and do a layback. And so I'm going to use some Pro Tools of early version of AI, or AI really, and I'm going to create what would in theory sound like more than one person creating creating music, right? Not one guy.
Multiple layers.
That's right, multiple layers, harmonies, and so that's the one camp, right? You've got the people that don't have any money and they want to use AI to look and peer big and to create this big sound and this interesting, engaging piece of creative music. The other side of it is the record labels who have lots of money, presumably, but don't want to spend it. They're guarding their bottom line. So what are they doing? They're trying to minimize the use of musicians. Live musicians and people are expensive compared to AI. And so their idea is to save money, protect the bottom line, and either replace, presumably, according to the musicians, replace the musicians or replace some of the musicians using AI. Now, there are some musicians that are already admitting to using AI to create their music. Timbaland, Grimes is a couple that come to mind. And there's a whole host of new AI programs just in the music space. Suno and SoundDraw. There's endless numbers of them, and they're all good for their own reasons. But if you're a musician and you're trying to decide, hey, do I want to do it the old-fashioned way, like the guy in Boston, whatever is Tom Schulz from Boston, who played every instrument on the first few songs on the demo tape for the Boston band. He had to lay back, play the music, then lay back.
I thought you were talking about Redbone. Remember Redbone?
Oh, yeah. Redbone was great. He just passed away recently.
He did.
Yeah, fantastic artist. Anyway, point of it all is you can do all what Tom Schulz spent months and months and months toiling away in his homemade sound studio in his basement. You can do that in a matter of days or hours with a laptop and a few ideas and some software, some AI software. So here's a funny analogy. Go with me on this. This is kind of crazy. So let's talk about AI and creating music and a version of AI and pizza. And here's how this works. A company recently, a few years ago, launched a new chain of pizza. It's called Pyology. And Pyology's idea was you came in and there was you went down like a cafeteria style line, you picked out your toppings, and they took a ball of dough and they put it on this platter, and this machine came down and pressed your pizza. And then they sprinkled the toppings that you had gone down and selected, and they gave you your pizza, and it was done. The problem with the Pyology pizza, in one respect, is that it's made mechanically. So you've lost the hand tosses, you've lost the little air pockets from the finger, and so the pizza doesn't taste the same.
What I'm thinking, almost,
are you hungry?
Well, no. I was thinking about the Pringle. The Pringle potato chip. When you talk about pressing it, right? You're just taking the powder, the potato powder, and you're shaping it into a mold.
It's a great idea. Every potato chip
is perfect.
It's perfect in the Pringles,
but they taste artificial. They don't taste real. I like a Napoli pizza personally. I like big black burn marks on it.
We're gonna have to do a podcast on pizza for sure.
Yeah.
Detroit style pizza all the way down the point.
Detroit style pizza.
Yes.
Oh my God!
Wait! Don't knock what you haven't tried, young man. Listen quickly. It's in all the stores now. It's legit. Anyway, started by a company
Marie
called
Chandler's
Buddies. Anyway, the point I'm making with this pizza thing is that the hand tossed pizza, each one is different. Each one's created in its own time and space. Yeah. And AI is the same, now analogous to music.
AI is the Pringle or the handmade?
Well, AI is the Pringle.
Yeah.
And obviously a potato chip, you open up a bag of Lay's potato chips or some other, they're all different for the reason that even though they're machine cut, they're still cooked different and there's different thinness to them.
For sure.
And so the point of it all is, I don't, at this point still today in 2025, don't think I know AI cannot replicate. Look, I brought a couple of things in. Here's some music. Frank Zappa, I just put it on this camera here. This is a Frank Zappa album. Frank Zappa obviously started in the late 60s, was considered avant-garde and was not really ever a commercial artist. But if you listen to Frank Zappa's music and you had AI try to create particularly Frank Zappa's music, I think it would struggle. I know it would struggle. There's a lot of crazy tempo changes and there's a lot of activity. There's a lot of music happening that.
Oh, I hear you. I think I actually
great album, by the way.
I disagree with you. I think that if you trained an AI model with all of Frank Zappa's music, his whole catalog, it could reproduce Frank Zappa. I don't doubt that for a second, actually.
So you're saying as well or as good as the original artist himself?
You almost wouldn't be able to tell the difference between the two.
Do you think that's true?
But what I think the AI can't do is what Frank Zappa did. So what I mean is Frank Zappa was pushing the boundaries, was pushing the limits of music when he was creating music. Some of it's awful. Some of it's really interesting. Very little of it was commercial, but he was pushing the boundaries of music. AI can't push anything. I think AI
can only respond to
what it knows. It knows.
Well, let's take another example. Take a Steely Dan record. Steely Dan has a reputation for hiring the best studio musicians, and they have a well-deserved reputation. Before Walter Becker passed away, Donald Fagen and Walter Becker had a well-deserved reputation for being meticulous musicians, and it wasn't uncommon for them to record 30 or 40 takes of a song before they put it on the record. Now, why did they do that? Because they were looking for that one specific take that had the subtleties and the nuances of that moment captured and recorded and put on the album. See, this is where AI is going to miserably fail, is that you cannot capture all those little nooks and crannies of the emotional moment. There's a story about some of the musicians on the Steely Dan. They came in, they played, and they said, okay, thank you, and they left. And they didn't know they were on the record until the record came out.
Yeah.
And the reason was because Walter Becker and Walter Becker and Donald Fagen were still parsing through what was the one critically perfect in their minds, version of that song.
Yeah.
Now, another problem with AI. Here's a very cool record, which was of Jimi Hendrix, which was recorded live in Los Angeles and stamped, printed, pounded out in the parking lot right after the concert. This is a bootleg record, but it's real. And this is a live performance. How can is AI going to are they going to, replicate the emotion of the audience, the peaks and valleys of the performance, the technical mistakes and the technical, the crescendos of a brilliant moment caught?
Like Jim Morrison famously live in concert would sometimes just collapse on the stage in a drugged out stupor. How do you reproduce?
Yes,
how can AI reproduce that?
We need to drug out the AI computers, creative computers.
So
you get my point, though,
the
right?
individuality, that component that you're talking about, I don't think AI will ever be able to reproduce. And so, but I think that AI is an incredible mimic. How I think of a lot of generative AI, and this is, again, AI is a very big, broad umbrella, and the generative AI that falls beneath that is the kind of AI that I would call clip art AI. You tell the AI system...
McDonald's? Is it fair to compare AI created?
No, when I'm talking about clip art, I'm saying that you can have generative AI make you a picture of
a puppy in the snow.
Puppy in the snow. The founders of the U.S. Constitution, or the framers of the U.S. Constitution, George Washington crossing the Delaware, and it can generate a picture that's never been created before, with the information that has stored in it and its natural language tools. It's not going to be a work of art that we think of as a work of art for the very reason I just talked about Frank Zappa. Frank Zappa was pushing the envelope. AI will never create...
Well, this is my point. You're making my point and I'm making yours, I guess.
No, I think I'm trying to support your point about the strengths of AI, or rather the weaknesses of AI versus the strengths of AI. Yeah. And I think there are a lot of strengths.
Cookie cutter, in essence.
It's great.
It's got to hit X's and O's, or ones and twos, or X's and ones, or whatever the heck it
ones
is.
And zeros.
Ones and zeros. Thank you. I knew I was. Thank you. It's got to hit. I do it. I just wanted to make you feel good. It's got to hit the ones and zeros, right? It's got to hit a metric. It's got to hit plateaus. Yeah. Well, wait, you understand that, right?
I do understand what you're saying, but you could think of AI, though, as in a fantastic mimic. There are some people out there who are amazing artists, but they can only copy the masters. What the masters did, and what makes them masters, is they created a new look. They created an entirely new look. You look, a writer who has a new voice. Hemingway, when Hemingway started writing, he brought a new...
AI could not write a Hemingway chapter in a book.
It could today. If you fed AI all of Ernest Hemingway's books, it could generate a new...
No, it could, but
entirely.
Would it be as good? Would it be as good? Would it have all
It would not be new. If you read,
that's a good point.
If you read Ernest Hemingway today, he's not going to be the same.
Because you can only use what he has created from which to create the new.
It doesn't have the ability to actually create something new.
Let's take Monet as an artist, right? If you put all of Monet's paintings into a AI,
it could paint Monet.
It could paint Monet, but it would only be derivative of everything it had recognized
completely.
It would only
that's what
the
I'm
attributes
saying.
of Monet's work would only be, there would be no new attributes.
No new attributes.
And in fact, there would have been times when Monet himself would have moved in a certain direction. Would have moved in a certain direction artistically, and art. People that study art would notice, hey, look, he's now bringing out more, using this texture, or using this light, or using this, and that there would be a creative trajectory that Monet himself would have taken that AI can never take.
No. So if you took the full work of whatever artist, painter Monet, a writer Ernest Hemingway, you could feed in the text of all the early Hemingway and the latest Hemingway, and it would see the pattern forming, how Hemingway was changing over time.
And then you're saying,
but it cannot create something that's not built into it already. So in statistics,
it's derivative. It has to be.
In statistics, you have models, a certain type of models that are adaptive expectations models. They look at the data in the past, and they can forecast only based on the data that's in the model.
Yep.
If there's some current activities taking place where the data is different from the data set that the model was generated from, it cannot predict what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And so the same thing is true with AI, because it's just using these kinds of tools, these kinds of statistical models in order to build whatever it is building. Well, what I'm trying to say is it's a fantastic mimic. There are people out there who can hand paint a Van Gogh as good as Van Gogh. They can hand paint a Rembrandt as good as Rembrandt. But they can never do what Rembrandt did or Van Gogh did, which was break the traditions of the time and create something new. All right? Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense. And sorry, go ahead.
No. So I was just going to say, but there are strengths. There are some strengths happening with AI. There are things that AI can do that are going to be very valuable. I do not think, for instance, that you're going to have actors out of business, having to change careers, say become waiters, because they've lost their acting gigs.
To your point, in back to the music for a second, music creators, the music industry is supposedly so up in arms about AI. Quickly, the interesting thing is that 60% of music creators have admitted to using AI.
Yeah.
So they're embracing it.
They're embracing it where it's
useful. They either
useful.
need it or want it.
They can be colleagues with the AI. They can be collaborators together, or they can do things the old way and harder and more expensive. But the ultimately though, you may see a resurgence. Say there's a lot of AI being used in film. And there are less actors.
Editors think they're going to be replaced. They're going to feed the footage. They're going to feed the footage into an AI
to edit
and edit the whole film together.
That could be.
It's going to be the AI's version of how those scenes should go together, which shot to pick.
But if it's based on a huge swath of editing
instances
of editing,
nothing new.
There'll be nothing new coming out of it, but it will do a serviceable job editing.
And guess what? For a fraction of the cost.
For a fraction of the cost, you might do it. So, but where creativity matters, right? And so you may see actors finding now that people consumers are desiring to see live acting. So you may see people going back to theaters, and you may see more live acting.
It's sort of like the resurgence of vinyl. It's good.
I suspect that it's going to be something like that,
right? So anyway, we
have a few more topics here. We need to get through. So just a few minutes here. So where is AI going to be very useful? Editing. Possibly. I think that's a really...
Well, medicine is the huge...
I think medicine. So I think particularly in medicine is diagnosis and in medical imaging review.
Radiology, it comes to mind immediately, where you're going to have AI have a database of tens of millions of x-rays, and AI is going to say, this is suspicious / cancerous, this is not, where it's the human error.
We've already seen, there are lots of academic studies have shown that AI tools that have been around now for 10, 12 years
are crushing it.
They're better than radiologists at finding particularly some of the smaller, earlier stages of cancer, of other strange phenomena that's taking place. So
AI didn't have a crummy night's sleep the night before.
There are no human elements coming into it. And some people are just better at it than others in terms of radiology. But you might have fewer radiologists, but you're still going to probably have a radiologist overseeing, say several hospitals now hire one radiologist to oversee the automated review of the scanning.
This is the panic of the creative communities and the medical communities and even the legal communities. You can have one lawyer reviewing the AI results on...
Well, but so in law... you have a couple of areas where AI makes a lot of sense. For instance, you can have a certain set of facts, and you could type those into an AI program, and the AI program can tell you the likelihood of succeeding based on this fact pattern in court if you were to sue. That's a big... With an actual percentage, that's a really important piece of information to know for an attorney taking a case, right?
Now they're playing the percentages based on what is AI?
So it would take all previous cases in case law that have these fact patterns, found out what the results were, and found out what the awards were. So you'd be able to do a very fine-tuned...
This is what a small army of lawyers try to do, spend for months and months and months, is look at previous historical
That's right. And
data.
The AI could be used for summarizing. For instance, suppose you have a question of law. So then you could type into, rather than doing the research by hand, you could type into a AI tool, and the AI tool would it would brief that question with regard to which cases are the most important cases referencing that kind of legal question. So you would already be presented with the most important
Pretty hard to
salient.
argue with that. I mean,
Now that speeds up. So the top law firms are charging $1,200 an hour for their partner's work, or $1,400 for their partner's work. They're charging for an associate who just came out of law school. They're charging $200 or $300 an hour. And this tool is going to be able to do far superior work than a
fraction of the time, fraction of the cost.
Tiny.
Yeah, fraction.
But now the law firm doesn't necessarily like that because it likes charging $200 for labor that it's not paying nearly $200 an hour for.
Sure.
But what you might see is then a cottage industry arise about doing the legal research through the AI tools much more affordably. So I think
one thing the AI doesn't offer, and it sounds like I'm being funny, but I'm being serious, is a person that's going through a bitter divorce, they call and their lawyer not only gives them legal advice, it consoles them and say, hey, look, don't worry about this and don't fight for that. There's too much AI is not going to play any of that. AI is going to play it right down the middle, right? Factual. This is the property law. This is the marital, equity law, distribution law, and this is how you should. Does that make sense?
It does. Now, this is something you have specific experience with recently, right? Contract review. So when you have contracts, you can have an AI tool review your contract to find any potential problems or faults.
You're talking about when I was
defects.
reviewing your contract for the podcast?
But it can
I found a lot of problems, Jeff. We got to talk.
It can find defects very quickly in the contract language that you wouldn't find necessarily.
Sure.
And so
for that, it's fantastic.
I want to leave on one important note. The FDA has approved 700 different AI algorithms for interpreting radiological scans. 700 different. Now, FDA would not give its imprimatur to these tools unless they were very good.
But aren't you suspicious that there's backhanded deals? And
it could be backhanded deals.
FDA is so wrought with corruption and
could be, except that
behavior of FDA.
You have academic research showing the same thing that the FDA is showing.
It bears out. In other
words,
yeah.
In this case, it bears out. Where we're getting a lot of pushback is from the College of Radiologists.
Sure.
They are afraid of losing their jobs, and maybe some of them will. Just like the editors, some editors are going to lose their jobs.
Film editors, or print editors,
whatever,
or content editors.
Content editors generally, but you may have additional, more rewarding, interesting occupations for them to go into with that skill set.
Yeah, fascinating.
Great stuff. Tons to talk about.
Yeah, so much left unsaid, but another fantastic and fun podcast. Do you want to say anything in conclusion? We're done?
We're done.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate
See you next week.
Thanks, man.